Hi folks, welcome to Some of Each, episode 6, on which I read you some fiction, some poetry, and some children's lit on a specific theme each week. And this week we're doing blueprints, where I'm going to be reading to you things that have to do with architecture and cartography. And it's hard to tell probably, but this scarf was a present from my friend Wee Heavy, and if you get close enough, it's got the map of Westeros on it from Game of Thrones. So shout out to Wee Heavy. So, I'm going to start out with a little fiction for you from Italo Calvino from Invisible Cities. And for those of you unfamiliar with this book, the premise of it is that Kublai Khan and Marco Polo are sitting together in a garden, and Kublai Khan is worried about the fate of his empire, and Marco Polo is distracting him by telling him stories of different cities he's seen in all of his explorations and travels. And there are these lovely little sort of like prose poems about all these different cities. And so I'm going to start by reading you just descriptions of 3 of the cities. So Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities. And they're in several different categories. In the first category here, thin cities. This is thin city number 4. The city of Sophronia is made up of 2 half-cities. In one, there is the great roller coaster with its steep humps, the carousel with its chain spokes, the Ferris wheel of spinning cages, the death ride with crouching motorcyclists, the big top with the clump of trapezes hanging in the middle. The other half city is of stone and marble and cement, with the bank, the factories, the palaces, the slaughterhouse, the school, and all the rest. One of the half cities is permanent, the other is temporary, and when this period of its sojourn is over, they uproot it, dismantle it, and take it off, transplanting it to the vacant lots of another half city. And so, every year the day comes when the workmen remove the marble pediments, lower the stone walls, the cement pylons, take down the ministry, the monument, the docks, the petroleum refinery, the hospital, load them on trailers, to follow from stand to stand their annual itinerary. Here remains the half Sophronia of the shooting galleries and the carousels, the shout suspended from the cart of the headlong roller coaster, and it begins to count the months, the days it must wait before the caravan returns and a complete life can begin again. This is another thin city. This is thin city number 5. If you choose to believe me, good. Now I will tell how Octavia, the spiderweb city, is made. There is a precipice between 2 steep mountains. The city is over the void, bound to the 2 crests with ropes and chains and catwalks. You walk on the little wooden ties, careful not to set your foot in the open spaces, or you cling to the hempen strands. Below there is nothing for hundreds and hundreds of feet. A few clouds glide past. Farther down, you can glimpse the chasm's bed. This is the foundation of the city, a net which serves as passage and as support. All the rest, instead of rising up, is hung below. Rope ladders, hammocks, houses made like sacks, clothes hangers, terraces like gondolas, skins of water, gas jets, spits, baskets on strings, dumbwaiters, showers, trapezes, and rings for children's games, cable cars, chandeliers, pots with trailing plants. Suspended over the abyss, the life of Octavia inhabitants is less uncertain than in other cities. They know the net will last only so long. I'm going to read you one more city. This is one of the trading cities, number 5. In Esmeralda, city of water, a network of canals and a network of streets span and intersect each other. To go from one place to another, you have always the choice between land and boat. And since the shortest distance between 2 points in Esmeralda is not a straight line but a zigzag that ramifies in tortuous optional routes, the ways that open to each passerby are never 2, but many, and they increase further for those who alternate a stretch by boat with one on dry land. And so, Esmeralda's inhabitants are spared the boredom of following the same streets every day. And that is not all. The network of routes is not arranged on one level, but follows instead an up and down course of steps, landings, cambered bridges, hanging streets. Combining segments of the various routes, elevated or on ground level, each inhabitant can enjoy every day the pleasure of a new itinerary to reach the same places. The most fixed and calm lives in Esmeralda are spent without any repetition. Secret and adventurous lives, here as elsewhere, are subject to greater restrictions. Esmeralda's cats, thieves, illicit lovers move along higher, discontinuous ways, dropping from a rooftop to a balcony, following gutterings with acrobat steps. Below, the rats run in the darkness of the sewers, one behind the other's tail, along with conspirators and smugglers. They peep out of manholes and drain pipes. They slip through double bottoms and ditches. From one hiding place to another, they drag crusts of cheese, contraband goods, kegs of gunpowder, crossing the city's compactness pierced by the spokes of underground passages. A map of Esmeralda should include, marked in different colored inks, all these routes, solid and liquid, evident and hidden. It is more difficult to fix on the map the routes of the swallows, who cut the air over the roofs, dropping long, invisible parabolas with their still wings, darting to gulp a mosquito, spiraling upward, grazing a pinnacle, dominating from every point of their airy paths, all the points of the city. So those are a few of the cities from Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. And I got this book, I think it was recommended to me, I think back in college, I was trying to remember today, and I bought it probably at Powell's, this funny little beaten up used copy, and have never actually read it. And then I started looking through it when I was planning this broadcast and was absolutely taken with it. So now I think I'm just going to eat it all up. So hopefully you will too. It's totally brilliant. Invisible Cities. So next I'm going to read to you, now this book kind of defies categories. This is the Selected Works of T.S. Spivet by Reif Larsen. It's sort of part novel, part young adult, part illustrated fabulousness. And you'll sort of be, I'm just going to read you a tiny bit of the first chapter. This book is about a 12-year-old boy who maps everything, not necessarily geographical things, but all things like dinner conversations and all manner of things. And it's filled with absolutely lovely maps and illustrations. And I'm going to try to read to you, every column is also filled with wonderful illustrations and tiny little notes and side notes. So I'm going to read you a little bit of those as I go, but I'm just going to read you just a bit of chapter 1. Here we go. The phone call came late one August afternoon as my older sister Gracie and I sat out on the back porch, shucking the sweet corn into the big tin buckets. The buckets were still peppered with little teeth marks from this past spring, when Very Well, our ranch hound, became depressed and turned to eating muddle. Perhaps I should clarify. When I say that Gracie and I were shucking the sweet corn, what I actually mean is that Gracie was shucking the corn and I was drawing a diagrammatic map in one of my little blue spiral notebooks of precisely how she was shucking the corn. All of my notebooks were color-coded. The blue notebooks that neatly lined the south wall of my room were reserved for maps of people doing things, as opposed to the green notebooks on the east wall, which contain zoological, geological, and topographical maps. Or the red notebooks on the west wall, which was where I mapped out insect anatomy, in case my mother, Dr. Claire Lineker Spivet, ever called upon my services. I constantly battled the curious weight of entropy in my tiny bedroom, which was stuffed to the gills with the sediment of a cartographer's life. Surveying equipment, antique telescopes, sextants, long rolls of goose twine, jars of rabbit wax, compasses, withered, malodorous weather balloons, a sparrow skeleton perched on my drafting table. At the moment of my birth, the sparrow had fatally crashed into the kitchen window. A stiff-legged ornithologist from Billings reconstructed the shattered skeleton, and I was given a new middle name. I had once tried lining maps on the south wall of my room, but in my excitement to organize, I briefly forgot that this was where the entrance to my room was located, and when Dr. Clare opened the door to announce that dinner was ready, the bookshelf fell on my head. I sat on my Lewis and Clark carpet, covered in notebooks and shelving. "Am I dead?" I asked, knowing that she would not tell me even if I was. "Never let your work trap you in a corner," Dr. Clare said through the door. And I think she was right. Every instrument in my room hung on a hook, and on the wall behind each piece I had drawn and labeled the outline of the apparatus like an echo of the real thing, so I always knew when something was missing and where it must be returned to. Still, even with such a system in place, things fell and things broke, piles formed, and my methods of orientation always seemed to unravel. I was only 12, but through the slow, inevitable burn of 1,000 sunrises and sunsets, 1,000 maps traced and retraced, I had already absorbed the valuable precept that everything crumbled into itself eventually. And to cultivate a crankiness about this was just a waste of time. My room was no exception. It was not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night with my bed full of mapping mechanisms, as if the nocturnal spirits were trying to chart my dreams. Our ranch house was located just north of Divide, Montana, a tiny town you could miss from the highway if you happened to adjust your radio at the wrong moment. Surrounded by the Pioneer Mountains, Divide was nestled in a flat-backed valley sprinkled with sagebrush and half-burnt 2x4s, a reminder of when people actually used to live here. The railroad came in from the north, the Big Hole River came in from the west, and both left heading south, searching for brighter pastures. Each had its own way of moving through the land, and each had its own odor of passage. The railway tracks cut straight ahead, asking no questions of the bedrock through which it sliced. The wrought iron rails smelling of axle grease, and the wooden slats of rancid, licorice-scented shellac. In contrast, the Big Hole River talked with the land as it wound its way through the valley, collecting creeks as it went, quietly taking the path of least resistance. The Big Hole smelled of moss and mud and sage and occasionally huckleberries. If it was the right time of year, though it had not been the right time of year for many years now. These days, the railway did not stop and divide, and only Union Pacific freight came rumbling through the valley at 6:44 a.m., 11:53 a.m., and 5:15 p.m., give or take a couple minutes, depending on the weather conditions. The boom era of Montana mining towns was long gone. There was no reason for the trains to stop anymore. Divide had a saloon once. The Blue Moon Saloon, my brother Leighton and I used to say while we floated in the creek. Our noses pointed pompously upward as if only gentry frequented the establishment, though in retrospect the opposite was more probable. These days, Divide was a town of holdout ranchers, fanatical fishermen, and the occasional Unabomber, not dandy fops with a mind for parlor games. Leighton and I had never been to the Blue Moon, but the idea of what and who might be inside became the basis of many of our fantasies as we floated on our backs. Soon after Leighton died, the Blue Moon burned down, but by then, even up in flames, the place was no longer a vesicle of the imagination. It had become just another building burning, and now burnt in the valley. If you stood where the old railroad platform used to be, next to the white rusted sign that when you squinted your eyes in just the white ray, still read Divide, from this spot, if you pointed yourself due north, using compass, sun, stars, or intuition, and then walked 4.73 miles, whacking your way through the scrub brush along the river basin, and then up into the Douglas fir-covered hills, you would collide with the front gate of our little ranch, the Copper Top, nestled on an isolated plateau at 5,343 feet, a stone's throw south of the Continental Divide, for which the town had gleaned its name. The Divide. Oh, the Divide. I had grown up with this great border at my back, and its quiet, unerring existence had penetrated deep into my bones and brain. The Divide was a massive, sprawling boundary, not determined by politics, religion, or war, but by tectonics, granite, and gravity. How remarkable that no U.S. president had signed this border into law, and yet its delineation had affected the expansion and formation of America's frontier in a million untold ways. This jagged sentinel sliced the nation's watersheds into east and west, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and out west water was gold, and where the water went, people followed. The raindrops blown a couple of miles west of our ranch would land in creeks that percolated through the Columbia River system into the Pacific, whereas the water in Feely Creek, our creek, was blessed with the task of traveling 1,000 miles more, all the way down to the bayous of Louisiana before spilling through the Lumi Delta into the Gulf of Mexico. Leighton and I used to climb Bald Man's Gap, the exact apex of the divide, he taking care not to spill the glass of water clutched in between his hands, while I minded a rudimentary pinhole camera that I had fashioned from a shoebox. I would take pictures of him pouring water on either side of the hill, running back and forth, yelling, "Hello, Portland," alternately with "Hello, New Orleans," in his best Creole accent. As much as I worked the dials on the side of the box, the pictures never quite captured the heroism of Leighton in that moment. Leighton once said at the dinner table after one of our expeditions, "We can learn a lot from a river, can't we, Dad?" And though Father didn't say anything at the time, you could see in the way he ate the rest of his mash that he appreciated the kind of thinking in his son. Father loved Leighton as much as anything in this life. Out on the porch, Gracie shucked and I mapped. The tickets and clickers spattered the fields of our ranch with their droning orchestration, and August swam all around us, hot, thick, and remarkable. Montana glowed in the summertime. Just last week I had watched the slow, quiet spill of daybreak over the soft, fur-topped spine of the pioneers. I had stayed up all night, drafting a flip book that superimposed an ancient map of the body from the Qin dynasty on a triptych of the Navajo, Shoshone, and Cheyenne understandings of a person's inner workings. At the nip of daybreak, I walked out onto the back porch, barefoot and delirious. Even in my sleepless state, I sensed the private magic of the moment, and so I gripped my pinky behind my back until the sun finally cleared the pioneers and flashed its unknowable face at me. I sat down on the steps of the porch, bewildered, and those crafty wooden boards took this opportunity to engage me in conversation. "It's just you and me, Buster. Let's sing a quiet song together," the porch said. "I have work to do," I said. "What work?" "I don't know, ranch work." "You are not a ranch boy." "I'm not? You do not whistle cowpuncher tunes or spit into tin cans." "I'm not good at spitting," I said. "I make maps." "Maps?" the porch asked. "What is there to map? Spit into tin cans, ride the high country, take her easy." "There is plenty to map. I do not have time to take her easy. I do not even know what that really means." "You're not a ranch boy. You are a fool." "I am not a fool," I said, and then, "Am I a fool?" "You are lonely," the porch said. "I am? Where is he?" "I don't know. You know." "Yes." "Then take a seat and whistle a lonely cowpuncher tune." "I'm not finished with my maps. There is more to map." So that is from the selected works of T.S. Spivet by Reif Larsen. Really cool, inventive book. All right, a few poems for you. I'm going to start with a poem. I went to a conference called Lit Views. It's all poetry that was in a little town in Washington last fall in September, and one of the courses I took was on mapping and poetry, so I'm going to read you one of the poems I read in that workshop. This is called Maps, and it's by Yesenia Montilla for Marcelo. Some maps have blue borders, like the blue of your name, or the tributary lacing of veins running through your father's hands. And how the last time I saw you, you held me for so long, I saw whole lifetimes flooding by me. Small tentacles reaching for both our faces. I wish maps would be without borders, and that we belong to no one, and to everyone all at once. What a world that would be. Or not a world, maybe. We would call it something more intrinsic, like forgiving, or something simplistic, like river or dirt. And if I were to see you tomorrow, and everyone you came from had disappeared, I would weep with you and drown out any black lines that this earth allowed us to give it. Because what is a map but a useless prison? We are all so lost, and no naming of blank spaces can save us. And what is a map but the delusion of safety? The line drawn is always in the sand and folds on itself before we are done making it. And that line there, south of El Rio, how it dares to cover up the bodies, as though we would forget who died there and for what. And if we could forget that if you spin a globe and stop it with your finger, you'll land it on top of someone living, someone who was not expecting to be crushed by thirst. So that's Yesenia Montilla maps. All right. So now I'm going to read to you one poem by Joy Harjo from A Map to the Next World. It's actually the title poem called A Map to the Next World. All right. A Map to the Next World for Desiree Chiarachi. In the last days of the fourth world, I wished to make a map for those who would climb through the hole in the sky. My only tools were the desires of humans as they emerged from the killing fields, from the bedrooms and the kitchens. For the soul is a wanderer with many hands and feet. The map must be of sand and can't be read by ordinary light. It must carry fire to the next tribal town for renewal of spirit. In the legend are instructions on the language of the land, how it was we forgot to acknowledge the gift, as if we were not in it or of it. Take note of the proliferation of supermarkets and malls, the altars of money. They best describe the detour from grace. Keep track of the errors of our forgetfulness. The fog steals our children while we sleep. Flowers of rage spring up in the depression. Monsters are born there of nuclear anger. Trees of ashes wave goodbye to goodbye, and the map appears to disappear. We no longer know the names of the birds here, how to speak to them by their personal names. Once we knew everything in this lush promise. What I'm telling you is real and is printed in a warning on the map. Our forgetfulness stalks us, walks the earth behind us, leaving a trail of paper diapers, needles, and wasted blood. An imperfect map will have to do, little one. The place of entry is the sea of your mother's blood, your father's small death as he longs to know himself in another. There is no exit. The map can be interpreted through the wall of the intestine, a spiral on the road of knowledge. You will travel through the membrane of death, smell cooking from the encampment where our relatives make a feast of fresh deer meat and corn soup in the Milky Way. They have never left us. We abandoned them for science. And when you take your next breath as we enter the fifth world, there will be no X, no guidebook with your words you can carry. You will have to navigate by your mother's voice, renew the song she is singing. Fresh courage glimmers from planets and lights the map printed with the blood of history, a map you will have to know by your intention, by the language of suns. When you emerge, note the tracks of the monster slayers where they entered the cities of artificial light and killed what was killing us. You will see red cliffs. They are the heart, contain the ladder. A white deer will come to greet you when the last human climbs from the destruction. Remember the whole of our shame marking the act of abandoning our tribal grounds. We were never perfect. Yet the journey we make together is perfect on this earth, who was once a star and made the same mistakes as humans. We might make them again, she said. Crucial to finding the way is this: there is no beginning or end. You must make your own map. So that's Map to the Next World by Joy Harjo. I'm going to read you a couple of my poems before we move on to our children's book. I'm going to read two from Daughters. For those of you watching, you've met a few of these daughters now. This is from my new manuscript coming out with Airlie Press next year. They're all persona poems in the voices of various daughters, and this is Cartographer's Daughter. When I wake, I examine my hands, slender and exacting like my father's. Latitude of thumb across palm to other thumb. Longitude of wrists to fingertips. Each line a border in the country of my skin. On the backs of my hands, veins swell and surface like rivers, strong and blue. When I dress, I contemplate my own topography. Forests emerge from land masses, hills slope into flat terrain. My contour lines, my raised reliefs, my hypsometric tints. From terrestrial feet to planetary orb of skull, I survey and clothe my body, figure ground. When I cook, it tastes like how my father builds the world. Oceans of soups deliver their edges to slurping shores. Volcanoes of bread rise up seeping steam. Archipelagos of cheeses, lakes of wine, juices of meats rare and wondrous flow across plates in red streams. When I cultivate our garden, I imagine myself as the golden Hesperides, my father as Atlas holding up the sky. My seeds all carefully charted, constellations of flowers and fruits coloring the sun-swept days. My father drafts the heavens, defines the night with stars. When I study, geographies unfold across my brain. I learn toponymy, roll place names like candies on my tongue. My father and I love symbology best, each pictorial legend, languages of shape and scale. Ornamentation of bridges, castles and churches to which we have the keys. When I assist my father, we carefully press out each parchment, choose our pigments, ink the details in. We invent the names of trap streets, work the tools, caliper, quadrant, vernier, sextant, telescope, and rule. Together, we navigate and map our days. He, my maker, I, his compass rose. That's Cartographer's Daughter. And then one little one from Navigation, my first book. And this is architecture. This is for this little town in Massachusetts we used to visit when I was a kid called Annisquam. Architecture. On an afternoon in Annisquam, Massachusetts, when I was young and she was younger, a child showed me how to scoop a handful of wet sand, close a fist around its soft weight, and let it fall in a slim stream to form castles whose towers rose in lumps and swirls in impossible balancing. She called this dribbling, a technique with no pail-shaped mounds, no smoothed sides, no moats. Every sandcastle I'd ever made was suddenly flattened, taken back to sea. At the tip of this stretch of beach is a lighthouse, and behind it the path to Squam Rock, a boulder so large and round you could climb it only from one angle with a running start, and watch the ocean appear where a moment ago there was only beach grass and sky. Later, visiting Annisquam's town hall, I would stand on a twist of stairs to read the names of sailors lost at sea. Their fine New England names stacked on the wall in a layering of paint and brick, as if their memories alone kept the building rigid and whole. And I would visit cemeteries, stones chipped and worn, almost too smooth to decipher, entire plots hidden in the woods of someone's backyard. I would take pictures, balancing the lens in an air rich with cricket noise and salt. And before leaving, the ribbon for a new bridge would be cut by a woman 107 years old, her wheelchair guided by a 7-year-old girl, the ribbon falling on either side so that we all might travel and return. So that's architecture from Navigation. And I'm going to end with this wonderful children's book, Iggy, Peck, Architect, by Andrea Beaty, and the illustrations are by David Roberts. We used to read this a lot when Elliot was younger, and it's also, like last week's selection, another perfectly rhyming book, which I really appreciate. So, Iggy, Peck, Architect. Iggy, Peck, Architect. It's also got lovely copyright page illustrations here. Young Iggy Peck is an architect and has been since he was 2. when he built a great tower in only an hour with nothing but diapers and glue. "Good gracious, Ignatius," his mother exclaimed, "that's the coolest thing I've ever seen." But her smile faded fast as a light wind blew past, and she realized those diapers weren't clean. "Ignatius, my son, what on earth have you done? That's disgusting and nasty. It stinks." But Iggy was gone. He was out on the lawn, using dirt clods to build a great sphinx. When Iggy was 3, his parents could see his unusual passion would stay. He built churches and chapels from peaches and apples, and temples from modeling clay. At dinner one night, to his father's delight, Iggy got a bright gleam in his eye, and out on the porch built the St. Louis Arch from pancakes and coconut pie. Dear Ig had it made until 2nd grade, when his teacher was Miss Lila Greer. On the very first day, she had this to say: "We do not talk of buildings in here. Gothic or Romanesque, I couldn't care less about buildings ancient or new." She said in her lecture about architecture that it had no place in grade 2. That might seem severe, but she was sincere, for when she was no more than 7, she'd had a great fright at a dizzying height in a building so tall it scraped heaven. On an architect's tour of the 95th floor, young Lila got lost from the group. She was found 2 days later in a stuck elevator, eating cheese with a French circus troupe. After that day, it's quite safe to say she thought all building lovers were nuts. As a teacher, she taught that above all one ought to avoid them. No ifs, ands, or buts. As you might guess, it would cause Iggy stress to hear such terrible talk. But he didn't hear. He sat in the rear while building a castle of chalk. "You, Iggy Peck, your desk is a wreck. Tear down that castle right now. You will not build in here. Is that perfectly clear? Do you need to see Principal Howe?" "No, ma'am," Iggy said. He lowered his head, and his heart sank down to the floor. With no chance to build, his interest was killed. Now, 2nd grade was a bore. After 12 long days that passed in a haze of reading, writing, and arithmetic, Miss Greer took the class to Blue River Pass for a hike and an old-fashioned picnic. They crossed an old trestle to a small island nestled in the heart of a burbling stream. But they no sooner passed than the footbridge collapsed, and Miss Lila Greer started to scream. "We're trapped here! Oh my, alas, kids, goodbye!" Her eyeballs rolled back in her head. She dropped to the ground with a vague groaning sound. Luckily fainted, not dead. The class was amazed. They stood there quite dazed, uncertain of what they should do. But one bright young man was off hatching a plan, which started with Miss Lila's shoe. Soon each lad and lass there at Blue River Pass was working together as one. And when she came to, Miss Lila Greer knew that something quite brave had been done. She looked in the air and saw hanging there a structure with cables and braces, and on the far side, beaming with pride, were 17 smiling young faces. Boots, tree roots and strings, fruit roll-ups and things, some of which one should not mention. were stretched ridge to ridge in a glorious bridge, dangling from shoestring suspension. It all became clear to Miss Lila Greer as she crossed that bridge over the stream. There are worse things to do when you're in grade true than to spend your time building a dream. Now, every week at Blue River Creek Elementary in 2nd grade, all the school kids can hear, along with Miss Greer, how the world's greatest buildings were made. The weekly guest speaker in t-shirt and sneakers talks of buildings from Rome to Quebec. Of course, he's the guy who builds towers from pie, that brilliant young man, Iggy Peck. All right, Iggy Peck, architect, Andrea Beaty, with illustrations by David Roberts. So we heard this tonight. We heard a little bit from me from Navigation, as well as Forthcoming Daughters. We heard a poem by Yesenia Montilla. We heard from Joy Harjo, Map to the Next World. From the selected works of T.S. Spivet by Reif, Larsen. And from Italo, Calvino from Invisible Cities. So if you liked what you heard tonight, I hope you'll order from your local bookstores for curbside pickup or online to support them during this time. And thanks for tuning in. I'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye.